unceasing shame.
Janet?
What's funny?
Oh, Janet, so dreamy, so shy.
Shy? I seized this poetic attribute and made shyness a part of my personality.
Poetry is everywhere, girls. Here and now. Mathematics can be poetry. Poetry exists where few search for it.
I realised that poetry was not an escape from the reality. There was no removal of myself to another world. There was simply the world's arrival into my own. For how else could I anchor that world here where I knew it belonged? In Oamaru, the kingdom by the sea.
That if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years.
Had I been a city, the shock of war would have torn apart all the buildings.
I don't care what Mother says, I'm going to sign up.
As if they'd have you, Bruddy. Aha! Here they are. My old putties. I used to keep out the mud from the trenches.
He seldom talked of the trenches. It was a word Mum used to explain why Dad was so often sad or angry. Flags appeared on the buildings. Men became our boys. Even Mother, the pacifist, clenched her fist and said, "We'll show Hitler." While I accepted the shallow glorification of the dead in Flanders fields. My own poems were published in the local newspaper. I described a dire event with the latest poetic words in my vocabulary, dreaming, boyish, sweet, with the old standbys of lovely and little. Like me, Mother turned increasingly to her poets for shelter.
As our own Thomas Bracken says, New Zealand as God's own country.
Bracken? He was Irish, Mum, and he wrote about sheep.
And dear Eileen Duggan, she started as a school teacher, Janet.
At a Catholic school.
Oh!
My criticism left her flushed and unhappy, and I felt a savage joy, for I was asserting my finer poetic identity.
Today I wept in class when we were reading The Soldier.
If I should die,
My weeping was not audible,
think only this of me, that there's some corner of a foreign field...
although I hoped the teacher might see me wiping away a tear and think,
Ah, there's Janet. So moved by poetry, so imaginative, a real poet.
when my beloved cat Winkles died, I naturally seized the opportunity to write an elegy. In spite of my dreams, I knew that I would have to train as a teacher, for teachers, unlike university students, were paid.
Now, turn over your papers and begin.
But I did pass the university entrance exam, which I remember chiefly for the fee.
2 guineas? You're 17 years old. It's time you left school and learnt the value of money.
A few years later, my first published story, University Entrance, earned me exactly that sum.
Time's up. Stop writing and put your papers face down on your desk.
In my earlier years, time had been horizontal, progressive. Adolescent time was a whirlpool. I struggled with those last years at school. I felt bewildered, imprisoned. Where would I go? What was the world like? How could it be at war? Why was the world? Why was the world?
So, Miss Frame, why do you think you would make a good teacher?
Well, Principal Partridge, I like school.
I try to be bright and teacherly.
And I've always been a good student. I was school dux.
Ah.
Principal Partridge was impressed.
And house captain. Captain of the B basketball team.
Probably seeing the uncomplicated girl, which I was not.
Jazz band.
He gave me a place
Loads of other stuff.
at Dunedin Training College.
You're lucky.
Isabel was getting rather worldly.
Lots of girls have to leave school early and they go to work, like Myrtle did.
I hadn't noticed.
And there's lots of rotten teeth and funny uniforms too. You're not so different, Fuzzy.
When I stopped wearing my school tunic after 6 years of almost constant wear, I felt naked as a skinned rabbit. And so the future. towards which our teachers had directed their urging threats and long-lost ambitions, had begun. It was now the present, the island from which there is no escape.
Tickets! All tickets, please.
I took the Sunday slow train down the coast to Dunedin, my first city.
Any more tickets for Oamaru?
I'd be living with Aunt Izzy and Uncle George in Garden Terrace. I imagined rose bushes, a view from my window of the peninsula, my own desk. I would attend training college and university in my spare time, and everyone would recognise me as a true poet. And
Seacliff. This is Seacliff.
I glimpsed a castle of dark stone.
That's the asylum up there.
Look, there's the loonies.
Where? Which ones?
It's hard to tell.
I hope they don't get on the train.
We left them behind. Those had been sent down the line.
Dunedin service.
I wondered, would it be up the line if you're from Dunedin?
Last stop, Dunedin.
Dunedin was half hidden in misty rain. Brick and concrete buildings, tall chimneys layered across the sky.
Aunt Izzy?
Janet, come in.
Full Garden Terrace was small as a doll's house.
Oh, we're so looking forward to your stay. We're so proud you're going to be a teacher.
I smiled while trying to hide my decaying teeth.
Uncle George is in bed.
Uncle George had cancer.
Would you like to see him? George, Janet has come to say hello.
You're the one who's going to be a teacher?
Yes, Uncle George.
I noted the grey pallor of his face and wondered what dreadful sight was concealed beneath the bedclothes.
I'll show you to your room, Janet. He spends most of his time in bed now, so it will be just you and I for meals.
Oh, no.
I was shy
That's quite all right.
and so very anxious to be thought the perfect lodger.
I eat very little. In fact, I'm a vegetarian.
Oh,
And I'll be frightfully busy. I'll eat in my room.
well, if you're sure. Here it is. Make yourself at home.
The tiny room looked out over brick walls. If I leaned out the window, I could just see a bit of sooty geraniums. So this was how it was. The future. Alone. Afraid of the city and training college and having to pretend everything is quite all right and that teaching is what I had longed to do all my life. That first assembly, the attitudes and customs of my new world, all this produced in me a euphoria of belonging, which was intensified and contradicted by my actual feeling of isolation.
So, you're living in one of the hostels?
No, Principal Partridge, I stay with my aunt and uncle.
It's not always good to stay with relatives. Is it nearby?
Garden Terrace, Carroll Street.
The Syrian Quarter. Not savoury at all. And you want to take 2 university courses, English and French. You do understand that teacher training college is full-time.
Yes, Mr. Partridge.
And doing well at school does not mean you will do well at university.
I will work hard.
Yes.
Reluctantly, he gave his permission, and his disapproval tore painfully at the perfect edge of my new world. The college building defeated me. It was too new, naked and clean. The common room was so vast I felt unable to enter. I was overawed by the lavatories. One had to walk, soiled sanitary towel in hand, from the lavatory across the tiled, echoing floor to the incinerator. I carried my towels home to be thrown in the cemetery, along with the wrappers from the caramello chocolate I secretly ate in my room. I was always hungry.
The plot of Measure for Measure is a comedy of disguise.
University was more intimate than college.
But it is crammed with
I was not
violence
called
and
upon to behave like a teacher.
with sexual struggle and comment,
I could just listen,
with decisions affecting life.
dreaming about the subject of the lecture and, at times, the lecturer.
Death and destiny.
Concentration was intense.
Crammed with sexual struggle.
A bit like this lecture theatre.
I was ignorant of the ways of love and sex. I watched with wonder the female students who, finding their man, fulfilled not only their own expectations but those of their family and friends.
What's yet in this that bears the name of life? Yet in this life lie hid more 1,000 deaths. Yet death we fear, that makes these odds all even.
My visits home became fewer. On the way home, I'd imagined that all would be peaceful, different. But as soon as I arrived, I wish I had not come. The antagonism between my father and my brother had increased. My self-effacing mother maintained her role as peacemaker and provider.
That's sublimination.
What's that?
Freud. You're frustrated sexually, Mother.
Oh!
Your superego tells you that, but your id disagrees.
So that's what they teach you at teacher training?
It's varsity, Dad. We study Freud for Lit Crit.
I try to use the language, try to use we when I talked of my life as a student, but it was futile. I had moved from the second person plural to a shadowy I, almost a nothingness, like a no woman's land.
Well, Auntie Izzy says you're a lovely girl, no trouble at all. She scarcely knows you're in the house.
During that summer, students were man-powered for the war effort. I was excited by the idea of going up Central, climbing into the clouds. The reality was a long journey in an old bus through a moonscape of bare hills to a fertile plain, by the banks of a turbulent, churned white river, the Clutha.
The snow-fed river, kiddies. The tides run up the Wairau.
Snow green, blue, mud brown and borrowing rainbows from light, with a burden rising from its power of the dead. Uprooted vegetation, the bodies of sheep, deer, and from time to time, people. After a year confined in the city, I felt the river was an ally, that it would speak for me. While we picked fruit, the farmers' sons strode among us like younger gods. I watched their eyes, their hands, glanced at the snowgrass bulge between their legs.
What's it called? This plant?
Matagauri.
It wasn't beautiful. It was a stunted desert thorn bush with leaves like tarnished flakes of snow. But under the dominion of the sun, I fell in love with Matagauri. The memory remains, the bounty of the river, the flawless blue of the sky. When I returned home to Oamaru, my summer love rapidly cooled. Isabel was preparing for her first year. Both she and I would be staying with Aunt Izzy.
If you start making puppy eyes and going all the way...
Isabel and I were good friends.
Well, you're asking for trouble.
But I felt alarm at her very first move.
Of course, I'm coming to training college straight from 5th form. I don't know why everyone doesn't do it.
Because enduring 6th form is a discipline for life? You're only 17, Isabel.
I've seen more life than you.
I saw my carefully cemented world crumbling under the force of Isabel's unexpected weather. It was hard work studying at both training college and university. The social studies assignment alone on the growth of the cities was to be the length of a book. I needed Isabel to behave, to obey, to study, so people would say,
"Those Frame girls are two of our best teachers."
Janet and Isabel, no trouble at all.
I needed her to accept without complaining the conditions I had set at Garden Terrace.
We're paying 10 shillings a week for this dump. Shh! Oh, I'm telling Mum.
Please, don't say anything.
There was a storm of letters.
Aunt Izzy is starving us. She makes us share a tiny bed in a tiny room. We're frozen day and night.
And nothing but scraps and vegetables.
I was mistaken in thinking they were lovely girls.
Always thought you were better than us.
Liars, thieves. And no wonder, the way they were raised, those ungrateful savages. Ate all my chocolates.
We did eat all her chocolates.
Because we were starving hungry.
Isabel left in triumph to live among friends in a boarding house and go roller skating with her boyfriend. I left with shame and loss. No longer a lovely girl, no trouble at all. I went to the only other place available. A hostel cubicle. And I felt sad to have lost her. The hostel was noisy and distracting, and I was struggling with growth of cities. While cultivating my poetic spirit, I had become impatient with boring factual detail. I procrastinated with 2 poems for the critic, one of which won a 10-shilling prize. Growth of cities emerged as a geographical, historical and social version of The Waves, appliqued with illustrations cut from magazines. It had a mixed reception. At home, it was heard that the lease on Eden Street would not be renewed. Some memories have been diluted, mostly by the storms that followed, so I don't remember the search for a new house, but it must have been desperate. On the brink of eviction, Dad took shares in a newly formed building society.
They have a monthly ballot. We may get a loan.
Mother, who never had any personal money, contributed her faith.
God knows what you have need of, even before you ask.
And miraculously, the following ballot produced a loan of £300. It was just enough to buy a rat-ridden ramshackle cottage with 3.5 acres known as
Willow Glen.
Our own house, kiddies.
If we keep up the payments.
It's got a buyer?
Even in summer, the house was dark, cold and cramped.
Fruit trees, a creek.
But down by the creek, the sun stayed into the evening. I pleaded for Mother to come down on the flat and enjoy the warmth.
Not today,
she always said, as if it were a distant dream, like publication or the second coming.
One of these days, in the cool of the evening, I'll go down on the flat in the sun.
Word came in January that for my probationary year, I was to teach Standard 2 at Arthur Street, Dunedin City. I delighted in the children and in teaching. I revelled in their art and poetry, which I pinned around the walls. I took pains, too, in teaching other subjects.
There were 4 dancing princesses. Il y avait une fois et un tiempo muy.
My failure was as a member of staff. I was too timid to go to morning or afternoon tea in the teacher's room. I was anxious about being visited by the headmaster, and I dreaded the end-of-year inspection. The only escape from my fears was the psychology class, supervised by...
I'm John Forrest, and this is Peter Prince. I do the introductions because Peter's an introvert.
John Forrest wore a rust-coloured sports coat and tomato red socks.
You see, that's the exciting thing about psychology.
Some of the women swooned over him.
We are the subject matter, all of it.
I preferred Peter Prince because introverts are more artistic.
We can actually do many practical demonstrations right here in the seminar.
But it was John Forrest who arranged the weekly gramophone recitals in the music department.
All those records and no one hearing them.
The first recital was Tchaikovsky's Symphonie Pathétique. I discovered that listening to a symphony was like reading a book. with all its progressions, its shape, its silence and noise. I learned the language of classical music and could say blithely,
Adagio? Did you like the Adagio? That andante passage?
The music room became another place where I felt at home. In spite of the worries about teaching and my future, I was happy. It was the year of my 21st birthday. The year the war, which had ground through my adolescence, ended. And the atom bomb was born in ashes and dust. Then one bright morning from a blue sky came the inspection. I greeted the inspector in my teacherly fashion. I stood by the display of paintings while he talked to the class. And when he settled down to watch my performance as a teacher, I said,
"Will you excuse me a moment, please?"
I walked out of the room and out of the school. I was drunk with pure freedom.
I'm a little on the lonely, a little on the lonely side.
I arranged 3 weeks' leave and went to university classes, to music recitals. I read and wrote. At the end of my 3rd week, school again loomed before me.
There's no one
I had woven so carefully, with such close texture, the visible layer of
No trouble at all. A quiet student, always happy.
that even I could not break the thread of my deceit.
every letter.
On Saturday evening, I tidied my room, arranged my possessions, and swallowed a packet of Aspros. I lay down in bed to die, certain that I would die.
I'm a little on the lonely side tonight.
The next morning, near noon, I woke. My first thought was not even a thought.
I'm alive. Alive.
I began to vomit again and again. I slept until Monday morning and woke with a slight headache. I was so overjoyed to be alive, school seemed a minor problem. I simply resigned. It happened that part of our psychology course was the writing of a condensed autobiography. I wondered, should I mention my attempt at suicide? I had recovered, and I was now rather proud of it for having been so daring. I added it as a postscript. To make it more impressive, I used the chemical term acetyl salicylic acid instead of aspirin. At the end of class,
Janet?
John Forrest stopped me.
I did enjoy your autobiography. All the others were so formal, but yours... You certainly have a talent for writing.
I do write. I've had a story in the Listener.
You must have had trouble swallowing all those Aspros?
Oh, I drink them with water.
Later that evening, as I was preparing for bed, I had a visit from John Forrest, Peter Prince, and the head of department.
Mr. Forrest tells me you haven't been feeling very well.
I'm fine, thank you.
No trouble at all.
We thought you might like to come with us to Dunedin Hospital for a few days' rest.
Suddenly, I felt free from all worry. Cared for. Oh, I could think of nothing more desirable than lying in bed, sheltered and warm, away from teaching and money, away from my family and my worry over them, away from my increasing isolation.
John will come and visit you.
John?
For little talks.
I was admitted to Dunedin Hospital, to a psychiatric ward. The nurses were kind.
This is your bed, Janet.
The doctors were questioning and concerned. 2 ambulance men moved the most troublesome patient to Seacliff.
Don't worry, you won't be going there. There's nothing wrong with you, Janet.
And after 3 weeks' observation,
you can go home.
Suddenly all the worries of the world returned. What could I do? How could I be myself? Where could I be?
You should pack your things.
Home. With the fits and violence, the anger and sadness, the alliances, peacemaking, secret sacrifice, toil and guilt, and
Janet?
Mother, hesitating in the doorway of the mental ward with her pitiful hat and her fearful...
I've come to take you home.
Home.
Go away.
The last place on earth I could be.
Go away.
Who was so firm,
Go away.
so confident
Go away.
that this coil
Go away from here.
would not infect his reason.
Get her out of here.
Hey, this way, Mrs. Frame.
No, I'm her mother.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Frame.
I don't understand.
No one asked me why I had screamed at my mother.
She's such a happy person.
No one told me that the alternative to home
She's always been such a happy person.
I'm so sorry.
was committal to Seacliff.